Yeah, very similar to Ryan and Brandon. We're going to starter pellets with CTC Denigard, 5 to 7 days post weaning. So they've been weaned just roughly a week. We're going to leave them in the nursery for 2 to 3 more weeks, roughly, depending on time of the year and space and when we're going to sell them. And I'm like Ryan and Brandon. I like to leave them on starter when I bring them out of the nursery and see where we're at. I can always, I think the best way to put this is I can always cool mine down with the next 2 or 3 phases of feed we have. It's really hard when you get into a chip barn scenario where those hogs have more space. It's not as hot. They're not as crowded, so they're going to lose bloom naturally to get bloom when we need it. So I'd rather get those hogs on starter and keep them on starter in the nursery and come out in a spot where if I need to cool down, that's okay. Rather than trying to play catch up in a chip barn. I've tried that. It's very difficult to do. I know we've all had that space issue where we bring them out too early and we've got to try and play catch up. It's hard to do. So I'm a big fan of starter. And for those that have utilized Showmaster Starter back in the day, this is a diet that was built and driven off that old Showmaster Starter diet, which was synonymous in the industry in terms of getting baby pigs ready. Something that I like to tell people with starter is that I might go back to starter when it's close to sale time. So when I've got them on a 803 or transition option, and I feel like we need a little more pop, a little more top shape, I may hand feed in a different feeder some starter pellets. Just 4 to 5 days before we leave to go to sale, especially if we're hauling a big distance. I feel like that those hogs have different varieties of feed to eat off or eat out of, and that really encourages consumption and bloom.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I love that comment about it's a lot easier to cool them down most of the time than it is to get them back. And
it's hard to heat them up. Ogle and I have been in each other's place enough, and there's times when you pull them out of the nursery when you have to, and you're like, man, these things are not bloomy enough, and it's hard to get them there because you change that environment, you change the level of heat they come out of, and just the environmental change. And they're not going to go forward for a little bit when you do that. That's just how they're built, and so it's really hard to gain momentum from a bloom standpoint when you come out of the nursery. And so I encourage people to keep on starter in the nursery. And we used to use starter meal, and I do think that's a good product, especially if you want to utilize corn and soybean meal on your farm. If you want to use your grinder and use our starter base 650 and make a phase 2 or phase 1 type of feed on farm, I think that's a good option. In our system, we with our feeders we have, it's hard to keep it flowing through our feeders in our nursery, and so we choose to go with starter pellets. It seems like they transition better from pre-starter, and we just keep them on starter pellets. But I know that there's a lot of people that use starter meal and have good success with that, because I do think they probably eat a bit more, being in the meal form, which makes sense nutritionally how it's built, and I think they will get a bit more belly on starter meal versus starter pellets. I agree with what Ryan said. We get more back shape and more bloom up high on starter pellets versus meal.
So would it be fair to say that, knowing your genetics, that you could make that call whether or not, or if you're feeding purebreds versus feeding crossbreds, that you might want to be making that call as whether or not you're going to be feeding pellets versus meal? Would that be a fair assessment?
I think so, and I think a lot of it is that I think both diets are very, very well. They're as close as you get nutritionally from a tag perspective, as well as what we put in the diet. I think a lot of it is you're going to get very good performance on either product. A lot of it has to do with your ability to get it and how it flows through your feeder. So if you have a grinder on farm and you want to utilize your